Um, Hello. Thank you very much, Julia, for the invitation to speak here today, and apologies if what follows will appear as a willful misreading of this invitation. Since since nothing in my curatorial practice so far would legitimize speculations on the global, either as a cross-section through contemporary mutations, geopolitical or otherwise, or as the sum of artistic events that seek to be at least as numerous as these mutations. I would like to substitute the global with an equally nebulous notion which might be universally stable in the relationship between political power and monuments. I will speak about a long-term project preoccupied with the motives, shapes, and effects of monuments. One that stemmed from very local emergencies in Romania, but was also driven by the thought that we can continue to think and speak about monuments in Eastern Europe and elsewhere without the negative prefix, and without the negative prefix and ironic folds of a counter or anti-monument. Contested and derided, amputated and incinerated, the monument abides. The past decades have been a golden era for large-scale designs or for perversely photogenic instances of destruction, with monuments inaugurated or detonated, retaining their centrality in how political agendas are communicated. The curatorial project I will speak about is not a collection of designs, but rather starts from an economic take on this genre. Nothing needs to be built. All the elements necessary to activate new scenarios of remembrance exist and only need to be rearranged in a different equation. The strategic deception of monumental time is, of course, to draw links across which past, present, and future confirm each other. So what is the converse of this temporal technology for reciprocal consolidation that is inbuilt into monuments? How could past and future stop resembling each other with stone, bronze, and concrete as translucent interface? I'd like to start from a distant predecessor and something that I regard as a striking intersection or perhaps a choreographed tandem of visuality and political will. This is The Triumph of Christianity by Tommaso Lauretti. Will zoom in, make it full screen, you think, or no? It won't.
Go to view.
Sorry.
All the way.
Oh, under.
Slideshows. Oops.
This should work. Tommaso Lauretti completed The Triumph of Christianity in 1585. The fresco spreads across the ceiling of the Hall of Constantine in the Vatican. It fills space with its perspectival push and pull, its rhetorical toing and froing. The two figures in the triumph never cease to appear to each other, to play themselves as opposed and inseparable. Absence accelerates into immediacy, and the atmospheric pressure of this mutation makes marble give way. The viewer has just missed the obliteration of Apollo's statue, an act of obsolescence, art history in spastic making. This is a dialectical image, at least in the sense of admitting an anteriority, a before that it expedites into oblivion, demonstrating the truth of its own idea of the future. So one future in this non-allegory is equipped with the past, while the other institutes a past. The spatial efficacy of the crucifixion, which could have taken this figure anywhere in pursuit of any task, is put to pedagogical use. Its capacity to unsettle the other sculpture becomes a museological function, so that Christ's ability to pulverize Apollo is both proven and held in check. The two actors are scaled and calibrated in relation to each other, but also to the success of the demonstration of how different objects are affected by the passage of time. History appears as both materially demonstrable and as unfolding at an imperceptible remove. If this is a museological equation, and if juxtaposition is, let's say, curated, and if this is perhaps the first representation of a curatorial act, then it dramatizes the reconciliation between incompatible figures and it gestures towards something beyond their immediate opposition, a territory where they coexist as each other's vanquished or superior other. This is consonant with what I regard as the vertical and horizontal coordinates indispensable to each other, even if in symbolic opposition, of the place where I began work as a curator, the convulsed landscape of post-communist Romania. Two elements of scenography that should have been mutually exclusive actually structured the country's relation to its recent past. Here is the vertical element. This is a monument to the martyrs of the Romanian Revolution, erected by the very political class that took power after '89 and did not clarify the circumstances for that martyrdom to occur. The Romanian Revolution is the first and maybe the last, since the communication infrastructure of revolutionary moments migrates now to other platforms. The last revolution, the first and the last revolution to be broadcast live on TV, with televisual transparency complicating the enigma of more than 1,000 lives that were lost. The revolution can be also described as a DVD that only contains an extended making-of feature, of which a film that you might know, Harun Faroqi and Andrei Ujika's Videograms of a Revolution, is an eloquent extract. But the DVD contains no actual film, and certainly not a director's cut. Never really initiated, stifled through the same obscure relays that allowed the second and third ranks of communist leadership to take reign of the country's neoliberal exuberance, the debate about the revolution was terminated with a monument, this monument, and historical clarification was buried under slabs of concrete and metaphoric contortion. In the context of an exhibition that I curated that was titled No Significant Incidents to Report, the artists collectively reacted to this act of self-exoneration, political. The monument was digitally collaged into an image of the events that it is ostensibly commemorated, so that the anachronism of their reciprocal visibility would do something to both, would invalidate each other, or maybe extract one another from anonymity and indistinction. I suppose we were with very simple instruments reacting to the unsettling interchangeability of event and statue, to the fact that this monument had been invested to remember in our place what was a conflation of grim statistics and disconnected footnotes, but also the misty foundation of the country's democratic aspirations. As far as the horizontal vector is concerned, here are a few images of the House of the People in Bucharest. This is the second largest building in the world after the Pentagon. Built during the 1980s, the edifice was to converge the archaic strata of the collective psyche and the political destiny of the Romanian nation. The House of the People was erected with costs so colossal that it was less a political metaphor for a golden future, but rather the oversized metonym of its depletion. After 1989, when the citadel against absent adversaries and mausoleum for everything that could have facilitated that illusory victory lost its commissioner and prospective occupant, a symbolic rebranding was effected, instead of the work of mending, interrogative suspension and expiation that could have been expected. The building was renamed Palace of the Parliament, and it was declared the product of the constructive genius of the Romanian nation. I'm quoting from the website of the Chamber of Deputies, rather than of terminal megalomania. So therefore, the house was turned naturally into the bastion of Romania's democratic powers, entitled to it by the very transubstantiation that had them elected. Transubstantiation is, of course, a purely democratic process. In 2004, a small wing in the House of the People, the part that you can probably see there in the lower half of the image with exterior elevators, was converted into a National Museum of Contemporary Art. 4% of the building became a gigantic, unnecessarily big Museum of Contemporary Art, a national one, of course. My colleagues and I mistook this fragile institution for an opportunity to engage what was amiss in the country's transition to democracy and to polemicize with an architectural Gordian knot of confusion, anxiety, and primitive political reflexes. I began my work there with something that was to be a series of site-specific interventions titled Under Destruction, and ended my engagement with the museum when I realized that projects that were not supposed to be site-specific became so by the sheer pressure of the building. Under Destruction 1 was a collaboration between Gianni Motti and Christoph Buchel, and its purpose was to deflate the electoral momentum of the museum's inauguration. Of course, the political administration that built the museum made sure that its inauguration almost coincided with elections so that they could take the credit for it. The intervention was supposed to disturb the official speeches with a cacophony of political voices. Gianni and Christoph wanted to organize a political fair in the basement of the House of the People, as all candidates to the Romanian presidency were interviewed by the two artists that were posing as Swiss journalists and that were, of course, taking advantage of these candidates' desire to speak out more or less misguided political projects of national salvation. And this desire, of course, spared Gianni and Christoph the embarrassment of any subsequent questions about their journalistic capacity. Here's another image of the political fair. I should note that all monitors had the volumes as high up as possible. Under Destruction 2 was realized by Santiago Sierra. Dark corridor was built. The corridor crossed the entire space of the museum. It also rendered that space invisible. It crossed the ground floor, went up the stairs, crossed the fourth floor in opposite directions, went down another staircase and then out. The corridor was populated by 450 women who begged for money. So two representations of the Romanian people, the enslaved mass that was obliquely and quite cynically portrayed in the name the House of the People, and the present-day cliches according to which my country is Europe's largest exporter of panhandlers, were confronted and resolutely collapsed. This is Victor Mann's installation on the facade of the Romanian Pavilion in Venice. The exhibition was called Low Budget Monuments, and in this installation, fragments of fur coats played a role that normally is delegated to anti-pigeon nails. I don't know if there's a specific name. Pigeons could not could not get in there because an animal was inhabiting these holes. It was a perfectly ambiguous gesture of protection and obliteration, like a soft negative cast of the country's name and of the tortuous abstraction that has been haunting this presentation so far. Then another work from the same exhibition. The exhibition was just trashed in Romania because it included non-Romanian artists, but I will not get into that slightly too provincial reaction. This is Cristi Pogăcean's The Abduction from Seraglio. There was a completely unprecedented event, something that we're entirely unprepared for. 3 Romanian journalists were kidnapped in Iraq. It was a deeply confusing story, and the work translates this incomprehensible event into a known code, that of the Oriental wall carpet, which is normally reserved in Romania for apocryphal biblical scenes. So this is an apocryphal political story. The project moved through a few other manifestations in the Netherlands and in Germany, but I will move to the last chapter of this conversation about and with monuments that was organized last year at Extra City in Antwerp, the institution where I now worked, and brought together 2 Dutch artists, Jonas Staal and Hans van Havlingen. I still have some time to understand the stupor that the exhibition provoked for our Belgian visitors, and the vast differences in thinking about public space and public art on the 2 sides of what appears to be, for all practical purposes, a very porous border. The 6 projects that we have presented were accompanied by oversized wall labels that you see in the background, huge. attempting to both avert the danger of incomprehension and also to revert the relation in size between documents of projects that were to exist in public space and the spatial coordinates of our gallery. Among other projects, Kunsthal showed a model that is faithfully based on a text by Fleur Achma, who is a prominent member of the Dutch populist Freedom Party. As an architectural student, Fleur Achma imagines a complex facility for reinserting convicts into society through an elaborate sequence of disciplinary spaces and norms. It's a prison that starts the circuit of the convict through the prison starts regardless of the seriousness of the crime in a space of sensory deprivation, a black hole that is followed by a military camp, that is followed by a commune, and then by a community center, while any act of disobedience along this journey into the light, as she calls it, sends the convict all the way back to the hole. The basic postulate of the project is that it does not suffice to separate offenders from society, but also offenders among themselves, encouraging each other through scripted emulation out of the logic of crime. So Kunsthal assigned himself the task of fleshing out, once again faithfully, this vision from a text that reflects on punitive and re-educational strategies, but includes almost no images. He was encouraged to do so by the fictional postscript to the thesis, in which the author travels to the future and congratulates herself for the success of her newly built prison. The thesis, the graduation thesis, ends with a moment when Fleur Achma visits her facility 20 years after the writing of her project. That fictional moment coincides chronologically with today, when Fleur Achma is no longer an architect, but one of the most vocal proponents of Dutch populism, with all its xenophobic and anti-elitist virulence. If I'm not mistaken, the work has been recently purchased by the Cadiz collection, which is a nice connection. Am I mistaken, Joseph? I'm not. I will end my presentation with a relatively lengthy foray into a project by Dutch artist Hans van Houwelingen and his national monument for the guest workers in Rotterdam. What you see in these two images is the Bijenkorf construction by Naum Gabo in Rotterdam, right next to the Bijenkorf shopping mall, designed by Marcel Breuer. Hans van Houwelingen's project interweaves the narrative of the guest workers and the political discourse defining, validating, or contesting their presence in Northern Europe, and the politically agnostic metaphors of the Naum Gabo sculpture. The sculpture was built between 1953 and 1957. So Van Houwelingen departs from the simultaneity of ideologies, desires, and anxieties of reconstruction after World War II that were manifested in both modern art and the political decision to invite guest workers to assist in the Northern European economic boom, to rebuild and clean the surfaces and angles of modern daily life. The first step in this artistic proposal is that skilled technicians, descendants of guest workers, restore this decrepit sculpture to its pristine condition. As Gabo's sculptures coincides chronologically with the arrival of the first waves of guest workers to Northern Europe, the project assumes the latter may have been involved in erecting the statue, or at least part of the same ideological give and take. When repaired, the sculpture is to be handed to the descendants of the migrants in the form of their own national monument. So the monumental latency of the Gabo and the incompletely acknowledged history of the guest workers, constantly evacuated from the Dutch and purely Dutch story of reconstruction, nudge each other into presence, with the essential proviso that this act of repossession indirectly confirms the fact that legal aliens indeed want a piece of the Netherlands. At the core of the proposal is the idea that the decision of guest workers to stay in Northern Europe after the completion of the tasks described in the contracts between the nations involved in this sociological transaction, I would call it, which were the Netherlands, Belgium, and Germany on one hand, and Yugoslavia, Italy, Morocco, Turkey on the other, was an ahistorical act. The rights that the migrant workers claimed to residents, to cultural and political representation, did not proceed from a past. They rather proceeded from work, from labor. They were a purely political claim that dispensed with the justification of a sense of a history unfolding. It was a political apparition that the history of multiculturalism itself had to mute or else lose its own discursive ground, that it needed to mold into the more acceptable terms of a globalized world and broadening social accord. So by allotting the past that the Gabo silently occupies to the guest workers, the artist evicts another past from the sculpture, that of the guest workers, that of the Dutch majority that would conceivably place Gabo's work as a piece in their own identity construction. Ruin and ghost are bound with each other in the work. The revolutionary identity of one of the first public manifestations of abstract art, compromised to an extent by its affiliation to a world of commerce, as I said, Marcel Breuer's Bijenkorf is a shopping mall. And then the vulnerable identity of a Dutch lesser self, on the other hand, subject to permanent verification and approval, are bound with each other. Ruin and ghost act as screen for one another, and they unbelong to each other. Gabo is dislocated, and the alien identity is locally translated as an incompletely answered claim. Thank you very much.